And so when we're talking about, what is it that we're wanting to give students, and then what are we trying to assess? And now we want to do it on, a massive scale when we're talking about something like what I'm teaching and with writing. What happens with all of these different layers when we're facing those kinds of, like discipline focused questions, and then scaling up and moving into the practicality of, someone's paying for this and what's going to happen.
Wonderful. Brent, am I saying this right, that we've started recording now?
Apparently, the mystery black swan entered our room and turned on the transcription and the recording, even though we weren't really going to do that yet. We're about to do that, but that's fine. That's a good black swan to have. Maybe he was more of just an ugly duckling, not a black swan. And that was recorded, so there you go.
Well, that's fine, and that's a great way for us to move formally into the session. Welcome to those of you that are here with us live. Also, welcome to those of you that may be watching this a day, a year, a month down the road from this and want to be part of the conversation. Our invitation to you is, let's not make this a 2 or 3 hour conversation that then disappears. Let's make this part of an ongoing process so we do something actionable. You can see my name up on the screen, so I'm not going to bother to repeat that to you. I'm going to tell you that I'm being a little puckish with my background. We have what Brent, my co-facilitator on this session, has is our official Space Camp logo. I've got the one for a session that we did a couple of days ago from an initiative called Are We There Yet?, which is documenting stories, success stories of learning in the pandemic era. And I just think that that whole question, are we there yet, is a beautiful question for us to follow through today. As in this live session, we explore ways to develop curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment that produce meaningful results. It's going to be very much action-oriented, conversation-oriented. We want you diving in with the things that are on your mind so that we can share those out and walk out of this with an action plan. Brent's going to briefly go over some of the documentation we have through Shaping EDU, so you know what's going to kind of provide us with a framework and what we want to have as a minimum result at the end of the session. So go ahead, Brent.
All right, thank you, and I'll let you take care of letting others in. So again, we're here just to help facilitate the conversation. This is your group. We will only get out of this what we can all really accomplish together. So with that, I wanted to make sure that we all see the deliverable that we need to come out with, because sometimes when you do these groups, you end up down these rabbit holes and stuff like that. So I'm putting that link in again. We can put it in a couple more times if we need to, or we can all just reshare it. This is our share out template. And what I can also do is share my screen. And just kind of really quickly, as you get a chance, throw your name in as team members. We'll be contacting you for donations to get to Mars later. So be prepared. We need to come up with a description. What are the subtopics and what are our recommendations, and then key intersections. So we don't have to go too far down that rabbit hole, right? This is really, we have about 3 hours, less than 3 hours to get this done. So we're looking at really high levels. So that's number one. They did, as our lovely Stephanie talked about, there was a Slido that went out. So if you need some ideas, you can click on this link, and this will give you some of the Slido information that other people are thinking about that we're participating throughout. And then we can, or we don't have to use the Miro board that's available to us, but it is there for us to use. We can use another Google Doc. We can do whatever you want. So that's the basic logistics there. So I guess my question to you, Paul, let me just go back one more thing. I would love to do a quick hi, who am I type of thing. I'm just nervous about just eating up all that time. What do people think? Do we want to say hi?
Actually, let me run this one, Brad. This is your challenge. You got 1 minute, the equivalent of about 30
seconds.
Yeah, you don't even have to say your name because it's up there. Just wave so that we can see who you are, who's speaking there. Tell us what drew you to the session, what you want to accomplish. And am I missing anything there, Brent, or does that get us a good start?
No, but I think that's good.
All right, so 1 minute shot, anybody. If you don't,
oh no, we can't do that. We're gonna just call on people. We don't have time for. So we're gonna play ping pong. The last thing you do is you pick somebody else. So I'm a professor at Arizona State University. I'm part of Shaping EDU. I'm a groundbreaker, and I'm a part of the Are You There Yet group and the Universal Broadband Connections. Dr. Ramesh.
Okay, good morning. My name is Ramesh. I have been Regional Director of Indira Gandhi National Open University, and for 2 years I was Director of Distance Education in University of Guyana, which is in South America. And currently I am with Ambedkar University, which is a public university, social sciences university. And I'm here as Associate Professor of Instructional Design.
And your physical location?
Yes, it is traditional, located in New Delhi.
Thank you. So choose the next person.
Bailey, you're up. Sorry, I'm going to jump in for you, Dr. Ramesh.
Okay, hi, my name is Bailey. I am a current undergraduate student at Arizona State University studying elementary education, so that's kind of what drew me to the session. But I knew of the conference from my role as a student innovation analyst in the Office of Applied Innovation at ASU, which is a special projects unit housed in the Office of the President. So I'm really excited to be here. I'll pop it over to Kelly.
Hi, I'm Kelly. I teach composition at Arizona State University, all online, and we've experimented in my department with learning contracts, labor contracts, Charter for Compassion. So we're trying to change our classroom experience with our students and how we're working together. Oh, how about Laura, please?
Hi, I'm coming in from Louisiana. I teach at River Parishes Community College, and I'm an art instructor. And I'm here because we're undergoing a lot of change right now, and so it's always a great time to innovate, but now's an even better time for us to do that. So yeah, that's why I'm here. And I can't see everybody. Okay, Shamima, can I pass it to you?
Sure. Thanks, Laura. I'm the first one to get my name right so well the first time. Thank you. I live in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates in the Middle East, and I've attended a couple of these Shaping Edu sessions, always very interested to hear the different views. I work with a number of national initiatives in this part of the world, implementing STEM education and entrepreneurship education in the K-12 space. So quite interested to know about assessments and curriculum for the world today where we live in, as well as in Mars. So I will go on to Kelly. I think you've done this already. Noah?
Thanks, Shamima. Hi, everybody. I'm Noah Whitman from UC Berkeley, where I've done all things ed tech and online learning for quite some time. I'm interested in this conversation to see if we can develop some more provocative or unexpected ideas around where we might be going with the future of curriculum and pedagogy.
Okay, Bethany, you're up. I'm just going to jump in if you don't do it.
Good morning, everyone. I am actually based out of Arizona, and I work for J. Orrin Edson's Entrepreneurship and Innovation Institute with youth entrepreneurship, and I'm actually part of curriculum development for K through 12. So I'm here to just learn more about what we can bring into the traditional classroom, and hopefully beyond that into more of an online classroom. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Robert.
Yeah, you got it. So I'm Robert Bajer. I'm the founder of Microcredential Multiverse. I've been involved in the microcredentialing space for about 10 years. I've worked at Digital Promise, Concentric Sky, Bajer, and most recently Higher Education Partners. I've worked nationally, I've worked internationally, and I'm always interested in assessment as a key for evaluating skills and competencies wherever and whenever they take place. So that's me. I'm calling in from Dallas, Texas, both rootin' and tootin', and I'd like to hand it over to Ruben.
All right, so good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all. So I'm Ruben Puentedura. I'm calling in from the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts. I'm an education researcher and consultant. And what I'm going to be doing today is actually I'm going to be going through the different groups throughout the day, because at the end of the day, I'm going to be helping you both summarize your experiences as well as present the kind of, well, so what's come out of all of this today? So I'm here also to answer questions. What I'll be doing is I'll be staying here for a bit as you get the ball rolling. Again, any questions you have, please don't hesitate to ask. And I'm really going to encourage you to dream deeply, widely. For those of you who were here on day one, I talked about the power of metaphor. Don't be afraid to use metaphors that come to hand to help you explore further what can happen with curriculum, learning, assessment, etc. So glad to see you all.
What
And
Ruben doesn't know is that we've disabled his ability to move out of this room, so he's stuck with us until noon. Black Swan, Ruben. Stephanie, why don't you jump in next?
Right. Go ahead, please.
Did you say me? Sorry.
Stephanie King? Well,
Okay.
Do we have two Stephanies?
Too
Stephanie
loud.
King.
I couldn't hear. I'm like, yeah, our team is stacked. I love it. Hello, everybody. I'm Stephanie King. I've been with Shaping EDU as a storyteller, and if you've received an email from this event, I've helped craft those, all of those, and all the messaging, just making sure everyone has a great experience with Shaping EDU. I've been writing about education and ed tech in both K-12, higher ed, education abroad for more than 10 years. So just bringing a wealth of knowledge, but also really enjoy being a member of Shaping EDU as a mom of an almost 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. So I gain a lot as a parent, and just I mean, especially a session like this, like what sort of education system do I want my children to grow up in, and what can I do to help foster just positive learning experiences for them? And I am going to kick it to Emily.
Emily Goodwin.
Emily. Ground control to Emily Goodwin.
Oh no, we've lost one already. Send out a search shuttle.
Okay, going to be.
Oh, it's actually Bea.
Oh, Bea, thank you.
So I am a University Innovation and Design Fellow at ASU's University Design Institute. And I met Stephanie just a few weeks ago while working on my communities of practice prototypes for other universities. And here at UDI, we have worked with 77 institutions in 20 countries, helping catalyze transformation in various aspects of their university.
Excellent. Aaron. Aaron Blumberg.
He just called me out. Hi, my name is Aaron Blumberg. I'm just interested in what we can do going forward when it comes to pedagogy. I recently taught at actually a prison education system. I have a background in libraries and community education here in Florida. I live in Fort Myers, Florida. And I want to use my background and see how we can enhance education, not only in the K-12 system, but also in adult education realm, especially as we talk about how we can better serve the underserved populations that we may not think about, such as prison populations. See who hasn't spoken yet.
That would be Melanie or Emily.
All right, well, let's do Melanie, because I think Emily wasn't popping up.
Hi, everybody. I'm an instructional media specialist with Bridgewater College. I'd say what really brought me here today is kind of echoing what everybody else already said, is figuring out how do we better serve our students, what's coming on the horizon, and just what are the trends and everything we need to be mindful of going forward to design a better education system for our students.
One more shot at Emily. You there, Emily?
I actually work with Emily. She may be on a call right now.
Okay. Can you give us a line or two description of what she's doing, so when she comes in, we can pretend we've known her for years?
Yeah. So Emily is the director of instructional design at Bridgewater. We both work a lot with faculty on being the liaisons between the faculty needs and IT.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So let's dive right into this. We can make this, no pun intended here, totally an academic exercise, which is not our intention. Or we can get to the root of it. What are we going to produce and how are we going to do that? Let me pop a question to you that I hope is fundamental to this and will get us on the right track. As you think about pedagogy, curriculum, the topics that we're addressing today, what do you want to see as the ultimate result of that concretely? If we decide what we want to see as a result, then we can back into what we're designing here. So what do you want to see as a result of the three topics that we're addressing today?
A list of unanswered questions.
Okay. Do you have anything specific in mind that you would love to see added to that list?
No, it could be instead of, I was just proposing instead of a statement, affirmation of our values, it could be sort of the opposite of that, of questions that are sort of unresolved or but are central to where we need to go. Either way, it could be both, but maybe we could try and do it all.
We will try to do everything we can. Anybody else? What would you like to see concretely as a result of the work that we're doing here today and possibly as a group that meets recurring if there's interest in that? I've seen Laura say a roadmap toward accomplishing change in concrete actions. Wonderful. Anyone else?
Perhaps a way to decolonize curriculum and pedagogy.
Talk about that a little bit more. What would that look like to you?
Oh, I'm still trying to figure that out. So,
all right.
So basically, you know, much of our, especially in the Western education system, and even around the world, uses a Eurocentric kind of a Western epistemology and knowledge systems. So if there's a way we can integrate more indigenous knowledge systems and non-Western or non-Eurocentric, not necessarily doing away with that, but how to integrate the world's knowledges.
Keep going.
So, I'm gonna piggyback on that just a little bit, because when I look at it, I don't necessarily think it as Eurocentric, because I think Europe has a very much different view on education in some ways than the United States does. But if we talk about the idea of ungrading, I don't know if anyone has heard of that topic, which, you know, our grading system comes from actually our Ivy League schools and such. And, you know, finding a way to better evaluate, that would be part of the assessment part, right? A solid assessment part, which I don't know, I keep thinking of Robert and his credentials and stuff like that when it comes to that. I'm just going to put you on the spot there. Which you just typed in there.
Robert, why don't you unmute yourself and just either paraphrase that or read exactly what you put in the chat. That's wonderful.
Yes. And +1 to what Bajer just said, I have a keen interest in exploring exactly that topic as well. So I wrote tangible strategies for assessing skills and competencies for micro-credentials at scale. So these are my colors showing, right? But for both traditional and non-traditional assessment methodologies. So speaking to what Bajer just said, looking at learning wherever, whenever it happens, and under very specific personalized conditions, being able to employ both traditional ABCD, true, false, traditional assessment techniques, and non-traditional assessment techniques, which I think are a catalyst for recognizing skills and competencies for non-traditional learners. So things like CBL, competency-based learning, PDL, project-based learning, on-the-job assessment, like these sorts of things that lend themselves well to non-traditional communities, veterans, elderly people, people in the workforce. These might be people who either do not have access by design or not by design to traditional education, as well as non-traditional learning environments. So relatively broad scope, but I'm looking to get feedback from this group because I think diversity of opinion is key to arriving at a methodology that's actionable.
I love the whole idea of diversity of opinion. I'm glad that we've got people here that are just beyond the borders of the United States. So we want to make this as global a conversation as we can. Thanks. And there was something else in chat. It's moving so fast.
Yeah, so we have the Laura talking about the whole student into the system of education. Not just their brain. This is all like the mental health thoughts and all that, I'm guessing. At least that's what it means to me. I think at the same time, I'm going to say also not only the whole student, but also the whole professor. because I think
Wonderful.
as a professor, we get forgotten. So I'm just going to add that as a +1 to that one. And then Melanie wrote in +1 to Laura. And like what Chris said in the keynote about developing a set of skills and passions. That's right. That's what I tell my students all the time. I said, I'm looking forward to learning with you, right? Because I always learn something. So that's a great point, Robert. As you're thinking about stuff, do we feel, is there a natural draw that we want to focus on? Curriculum, pedagogy, assessment. Those are 3 huge things. And Ruben, I know we're super astronauts here. I don't know if we can really tackle all 3 of them necessarily, unless we go, okay, 5 here, 5 here, 5 here. Is anyone feeling like they're gravitating towards one that we want to start, like, so we can make out some breakout rooms and stuff? So just so you know, I'm the logistics guy. Paul's the idea guy, if you haven't figured that out.
I forgot to bring my ideas this morning, Brent.
I keep us on track if you haven't figured that part out yet. All right, so is there any thoughts about that? I know where Robert's gonna go.
I wonder if there's.
Sorry.
Was it Noah who was starting to talk? Noah and then Laura, right?
Yep.
Go ahead, Laura.
I was just going to say, I feel like, at least today, assessment really drives the other 2. It's kind of like the tail wagging the dog.
Okay.
And so maybe that's one of the places to look at how do you sell the idea that it doesn't have to be assessment in order to turn it into what we want to see it.
I come at this not as an academic, but as somebody involved in adult learning at the workplace level. And one of the first things we always sit down and ask ourselves, because people are always coming up to us and saying, hey, we need a training on this, we need a training on that. And that's not actually ever what's needed. So we always ask, what's the transformation you want to see? What's the concrete, quantifiable thing that will look different in the learners afterwards? That's why I was posing a question at a very broad level up front. What do we want to do in these 3 hours that will give us something that we're proud of? I think one possible framework, and I just throw this out as a potential thing, is that word that somebody else just mentioned from the keynote, the passions. I love that line about passions rather than roles. So whatever we do down this path, let's have passion rather than role as an underpinning of the work that we do, with an idea of what's that going to look like 3 hours from now when we finish this conversation? What might it look like a month from now? Because we don't have to plan out something over a 5 or 10 year period. We're not planning curriculum. It's going to take us hours and hours. Today's the action plan to say, what difference can we make? Brent, you want to add anything to that?
No, I guess also just thinking about what it means to us.
Yeah.
Right. What does this topic mean to us? And I know there's some things in there. I'm going to say, jump into the share out template. You can put notes there. There's a spot for a description. We can just throw notes in there for right now, and then we can clean that up in our last hour and such. And what does this topic mean to us? I know Robert put in a note, thinking about learner objectives. I think that's interesting. Robert, so when I hear that, my thought is, well, wait, learning objectives are different for every class. So I'm trying to wrap my head around how we could come up with something that we can focus on learner objectives on this piece. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, so just, thinking really quick. So first off, I was a biology teacher for 5 years at a high school. So I was like, not only from the technology side and all this stuff, but I was in the trenches, so to speak, of like trying to help students get excited about science, which sometimes is like trying to sell a ketchup popsicle to a person in white gloves. So I always thought very carefully about learning objectives because they are associated with curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment. So curriculum in the sense that the required knowledge, understanding, and skills. So like what exactly is included in the teaching curriculum. And then there's the pedagogy, so the approach that help teaching and learning take place, whether that's service learning, whether that's in the classroom, whether that's lab experience or volunteer work. And then finally assessment. So the process of finding out what learners have learned. So that assessment is really critical because that is where the trust is between the institution and where that student ultimately ends up taking their award and then exchanging that to unlock some career opportunity or some academic opportunity. So like Bailey said in the comments, what learners are learning, how they learn, and how we evaluate that. I think that's a really great summation, because sometimes these conversations can get a little high level. I mean, there's only so much most people know about assessment and pedagogy and curriculum. Even if they are an educator, they know about it through their perspective. You know, I'm a biology teacher in Elizabeth, New Jersey, right? Like I have a very specific take on what all those three things mean. So maybe thinking about something that's a little maybe higher level at this point, so it's more broadly applicable across the folks in the room. So I thought learning objectives might be a great place to start. You know, what are your learning objectives for your classroom, for your learners? Are they professors, Brent, or are they actually like K-12 students? You know, who you're teaching also really matters.
We'll do that as soon as we do one last thing. I just was alerted that Black Swan has arrived to sweep Ruben away from our room to another room. Ruben, anything you want to say before you fly away from us, at least briefly?
Yeah, no, I think everything I'm hearing sounds absolutely great. I think, you know, you've got some great ideas as point of departure. There's one aspect of the metaphor I want to encourage you to engage with, because I think it also will help bring some of what you already mentioned forward. And that's the aspect that if we're doing this for Mars, this isn't a research station on Mars. And what I mean by that is the following. Think of McMurdo Station on Antarctica today. If McMurdo Station doesn't get supplies from the outside world, you know what happens with McMurdo Station? Bye-bye, it's gone, okay? It cannot subsist as an entity unto itself. What you won't be thinking about is how would this survive as a colony? So this would be a colony that has to have its own life. It's a colony that has to be able to interact. In other words, the education system you're thinking about has to have precisely that quality. It can't just be, well, we think it's going to be this. No, it has to respond to the needs of an actual colony. If you just plan for what might happen in the future, but aren't ready to respond to what's happening in the now, that colony isn't going to be around for long. So think about using that aspect of the metaphor. Okay, don't worry too much about what's the exact mix of oxygen or how many potatoes you should grow. Okay, just rewatch The Martian and you'll find out how many potatoes you need to grow. But the other aspect, that what you're thinking about is what would the Martian colony need in its education system? Think about how that metaphor might help. All right, I'll be back later. Thank you all. You're all doing an amazing job. I'll check in later. See you.
Ramesh just put in the chat here, and designing for distance learning for the self-learning materials, we're specifying learning outcomes as a focus on outcomes-based curriculum. And again, I want to give us a framework that works there. Drawing very briefly and superficially from some of what I've heard over the last few days. We heard yesterday from Robots and Pencils about the need for communication and effective communication. We're going to take ourselves off of Earth and get ourselves back to Mars. Let's think about communication that would run through an education system there that we can use back on our own planet. Another one Brett and I have kicked around a lot is inclusion, diversity, equity. We all know that we're really lacking in that and we need to do better. So what kind of colony do we want to set up on Mars that, again, is going to be transferable back here in terms of being as inclusive as possible and use that to produce something concrete? Third thing is the overall theme that I keep hearing from people like our colleague Casey Davis, who wrote a book, Digital Civics and Citizenship, about the idea of we're not just learning to learn. We're learning because we want citizens to be able to function at all levels to the greatest extent possible. And so we don't want to lose that in what kind of civic and citizenship setting are we creating in our new colony? And finally, the whole thing of once we're there and we're working and we're thriving together, what does our education system have to do to support work and learning? So those are a bunch of frameworks. We've gotten ourselves past that first half hour, and it's really time to start digging in. Format questions for us. Do we want to stay as a group or do we want to do breakout groups thematically? What's the general sense here? You put it in chat or just unmute yourself. Let's figure out whether we want to stay as a group and tackle things at a brief level, knowing that this is the beginning, not the conclusion of a conversation. Total group or breakouts? What's your preference?
And just so everybody knows, it is an official meeting. There's a pet, so we're good. This is Scotty. We got total group coming up here, group, a few breakouts for one vote for breakout. Group. Sounds like we're staying as a group. Okay. So that means from a logistical standpoint, we need you, not Paul and I, to speak up more. We need to hear your voices. We can drive this conversation, But that was my one concern about staying at as full of all the 18 of us right now as all, but we can do it because that's what the team wants and that's all good. So, but we really need you to be quick on that take. We've got 2.5 hours with 2 15-minute breaks in there. So that's 2 hours to go. Just that's my logistics. So what do we need on Mars? Besides more cats?
This might be extending the metaphor too far, but the interesting thing about moving to Mars, literally, is that, and there's a whole science behind terraforming Mars, is that you literally have to recreate almost everything on Earth, the living systems, the plate tectonics, the atmosphere, in order to live sustainably long-term. For me, that gives me actually food for thought in terms of, applying it for an educational context as well. One of the places I would go is that I think people are simply unaware of the degree to which we're already enmeshed in a network. I myself have fears. I have young kids as well, concerned about the degree to which I allow them to use technology and what technology is going to look like in the future, how addicted they're going to be, how immersed, how reliant. I think it's pretty clear that we're all going to become super enmeshed and reliant in this technological layer that will be a core part of our ecosystem. And that's a pretty scary thought, but it's comforting for me to reflect on the big picture is that, of course, we are already enmeshed in this system, which is actually really, really hard to extract ourselves from. So living on Mars is not a problem that's easily solved. But when you start thinking about, again, what we're going to be like when we can't unplug from this network, it raises a set of questions. Raises a set of questions about our value system, equity, I think decolonizing the curriculum, all kinds of things. There'll be a continual project around bias that we'll need to explore. Anyway, just food for thought.
Keep going. I'm trying to transfer some of this into our planning document so that we've got some kind of a.
Okay, so what about do we want to focus on curriculum? Do we want to focus, because we had one vote, Laura was talking about, let's focus on the assessment piece. Because I don't know if we're going to be able to really get, like I said, get through all of it. So, or do we want to spend 20 minutes saying high stuff on curriculum, then pedagogy, then assessment? This is yours, not our group. This is your group. I'll keep saying that.
I vote for curriculum. I just like what you said, spend some time on all of them, starting with curriculum.
Okay. Anyone else? Thumbs up, something? Couple thumbs up. All right, that's what we'll do. So between now and 10 o'clock, let's focus on curriculum. And what are our curriculum subtopics? Right, so we're looking for subtopics, recommendations, and then intersections. So we're looking for subtopics on curriculum.
And this is for what age groups? Is it all kinds of learners? Who's our audience?
That's what
we
I
talked
was
about. It's an education system. So preschool to college. Good luck.
I would put in a plug for lifelong learning as our framework and then do the subgroups on that. Start with the big thing. What do we need throughout our lives in order to produce whatever it is we're trying to produce for our education system, and say, so how does that fit into K through 12? How does that fit into typical university and college level? What does that do for workplace learning, tying back to those of us who go back and get a degree at some point when we're in the workplace?
And I think that can also be the down the line piece, right? Let's look at that big piece. The separating it out into the different aspects and the different parts of learning and in our lives, that's another time. Mm-hmm. I think based on our timing here.
I'm imagining not compartmentalizing the systems into specific age groups, but more on not just interdisciplinary, but intergenerational learning. And that could be localized wherever area of Mars where we're going to be So that's what I suggest is intergenerational learning.
I agree with B, especially if we consider that it's passion driven. You're going to have, you're going to have mixed groups in terms of age and experience. So it's almost, in some ways, possibly going to take on more of, I don't want to say an apprenticeship system, but where learners are learning from those with more experience and vice versa. It's more fluid than a teacher and a student.
Community of practice.
I'm sorry, no, I didn't hear you.
Oh, sounded like a community of practice, what you're describing, right? With peer-to-peer instruction and learning, peer learning.
Yes.
Yes.
Experiential. Experiential, go ahead.
Experiential, yes, that was going to say in community of practice, the key thing is the practice part where you're not just sharing knowledge with each other, but actually applying those skills right away.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bea. And Dr. Ramesh, you put in there about aligning with the mission of a university and graduate attributes. I think that's a good point. We're going to be looking a little higher than that, I think, because we have this lifelong learning idea. So it's not just necessarily a university, but it's definitely could be a subtopic somewhere along the line, I think. And then Annie, who's joined us, accessibility of the education system, obstacles learners might be facing on Mars. Okay, excellent. Excellent, Annie, good points. Hands-on literacy in the languages of the community and subcultures. What are those languages? Kelly, if you can figure out what the Martian languages are, then you're ahead of all of us.
And part of what my comment is like, we're communicating in English right now, but that has its own biases, and right, who is going to be part of this community functioning in science, in what, if this is going to be, this colony that is sustainable. So what is the language that the people will be communicating with one another? And when the plant people are communicating with the rocket people, how are they going to talk? And so what languages, do we need to be able to understand from one another? And if there are children and adults and different experiences, what does that look like? Because that is how we can learn from one another, by respecting our languages and by experimenting in those and trying to adopt and understand more.
I think that's a great point, Kelly, because language really inscribes thought, right? And no one language encompasses the world's knowledges. So how do we pick a universal language, or can there be multiple languages depending where you are in Mars?
B, I think it's interesting you mentioned sign language, because that can also overcome some of, the communications potentially outside, let's say, the colony, outside the pod. Say you're out on the surface, and being able to communicate in a way that doesn't require, the spoken word could be really useful.
That's what scuba divers use, by the way. They use sign language.
Okay, to recap and keep this going, right now what I've been gathering and putting into our important subtopics is curriculum. Let's not compartmentalize what we do. Look rather at intergenerational learning on Mars, communities of practice, peer-to-peer learning, including experiential learning, requiring application of learning at every possible opportunity. We have a subtopic of learning design strategy. We've just gotten into the theme of accessibility with the idea of accessibility to our educational system on Mars, overcoming barriers to universal accessibility, which takes us into the interesting area of languages spoken and how diversity of languages helps or hinders accessibility to learning. I love that thing that I put in quotes here from, I think it may have been Bajer, who just said, language inscribes thought. And taking that, since language inscribes thought, we need to decide how to pick a universal language or decide how to work with multiple languages in ways that support learning. Takes us into some very rich categories. What does that mean in terms of actions that we would want to take? Let's start with curriculum. What would a recommendation be for Mars and then bringing it back to Earth in terms of not compartmentalizing what we do? How do we avoid that problem that we faced?
Paul, can you rephrase that question?
Sure. Take the idea of curriculum, the challenge being, let's not compartmentalize curriculum. Let us rather look at intergenerational learning. What is a recommendation we would make for our education system on Mars that could be brought back to Earth in terms of intergenerational learning through curriculum?
Curriculum is sort of a loaded word, right? It has implications. I mean, I'm wondering if we're talking about lifelong learning, in some cases, I think of something very different than K through 12 or even higher ed curriculum. You're talking about, you know, folks with a common passion coming together to share expertise. I mean, there's the example of TikTok. That's very loose and open-ended. You know, I wonder if what we're going to see in the future is actually temporary assemblages of both people, data, and tools coming together, where there isn't actually a sort of rigorous instructional framework. You know, there was one that was put forward, you know, explore, analyze, elaborate. That works when you're led by, when there's, you know, when you have time to put a certain sort of scaffolding in place and have that traditional teacher role. Is that what we're talking about here? That may be, or there may be multiple modes of learning that go on here.
You know, what we're really talking about is just exactly what you did. You throw out an idea, see how it resonates with others. And I will say, from my point of view, that speaks to a lot of experience I have. I think of a very turgid book that really influenced me in a lot of ways. It talked about groups that came together as long as they were needed within an organization. And then those members of the group within the same organization would disband when they finished their need and moved into something else. And how we might translate that as taking some of what you just said is, for curriculum, temporary assemblages of tools and people to meet specific learning needs, bring people together with a variety of experiences on an as needed basis. When that need is met, the people in that group reform in other groups to meet the next thing. So we're talking about flexibility in identifying learning needs, meeting those needs, and then moving on to the next thing with the resources we have. So am I capturing it right if I say flexibility and responding, pivoting on the turn of a dime to what's needed for our learners in lifelong learning?
I think that makes sense, especially, you know, things are always in flux, but especially in that kind of a situation, it makes any organization more resilient too. So, and I threw out in the chat, if we're going to have this ebb and flow, certainly having a catalog of some sort or a database of who has what skills and what expertise would be important.
Yeah, I just want to add something to what Laura said. So, and what Paul said. So Paul, your description of like the central conundrum here is this tension between centralized education systems and decentralized education systems. So when we think about centralized education systems, to Noah's credit, we're talking about very concrete models that can be applied at scale, right? Like there's a system for that. But when we're talking about decentralized educational systems, then we're really talking about what happens very organically on places like TikTok. Like people share a common interest, they start to coalesce around that interest, they collaborate and communicate, they achieve some objective, even if it's just for laughs, and then they move on to another topic. So I think there might be something in that, resolving that tension between sort of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, like, right, like swatting out decentralized education systems and their application versus like centralized education systems, which, you know, we look at some of the greatest creations of mankind and it takes a lot more than a village in a lot of cases. So like, how do you mobilize that number of people? It's, I mean, I was part of the Zuccotti Park 99% movement, right? Like when I was in New York, I saw sort of the consequences of a decentralized movement at scale. So I think that we see this in phenomena that are both exclusive to education and outside of the what we would generally think of as education. So, I mean, learning from some of the things that we've done here on Earth, and then applying that rationale to, you know, interplanetary, you know, learning experience, these sorts of things. But that's just the core tensions between decentralized and centralized education systems, and maybe reconciling those two would help us come up with a great model for curriculum pedagogy and assessment.
We have a couple of jargon words that I think capture this if we buy into the jargon. One is the distributed autonomous organizations term that I think it was Robert who may have put into the chat.
Yeah.
And then when I was describing, it took me a minute to remember what it was called, quantum organizations, which was just fancy talk for people get together, they meet a need, then they move on to the next thing. And because they learn to work together flexibly like that, they become stronger and stronger as organizations. Sort of takes us back to what Ruben has been talking about a lot, both at the conference and before the conference, the whole Taleb idea of anti-fragility. We can be resilient in bouncing back from things, but we take that higher level. And when we face the most difficult things, like what we've all faced in terms of learning in the pandemic era, we face that, we struggle with it, and we come out of it successful. We are stronger. So we talk about anti-fragile organizations, and we might want to adapt that to anti-fragile curriculum, which means the more it gets pushed around and the more it adapts to the changing situations, the stronger our lifelong learning environment becomes. Thoughts from anybody else on that?
I just have to chime in. You have to build the memory into the system. Like, I think institutional knowledge transfer is the least glamorous, like the least sexy thing on the planet. But if your organization can't remember what it did wrong, then it can't learn from those things. So I think like committing successes, and we'll just call them failures, because I mean, there are lots of failures that are throughout the education system currently, and there probably will be into the future. But like capturing those things and actually learning from them, I think are critical to what you just mentioned, Paul, and it contributes to the success of those teams. You know, this is just an anecdote, but maybe it's a good metaphor, is that when I was in high school, I actually didn't learn a lot in high school. I was like borderline dropping out of high school at every moment I was in high school. I didn't even want to go to college. I was going to join the military. It was just the traditional academic route was not up my alley. I was not learning. So I actually enrolled in Boy Scouts, which was sort of an extracurricular, but I ended up becoming an Eagle Scout, and I learned so much more math, science, reading, writing out in the woods than I would have ever learned in the inner city that I grew up in. And it's just because of me individually as a learner. So I think that the example here is that, you know, when I was in Scouts, when I was a senior patrol leader, I would teach the younger Scouts, and then they would go compete. I wasn't allowed to compete. So the success of our troop rested on my ability to teach the younger Scouts how to build fires and build tents and identify birds and trees and these sorts of things. And I think that says a lot about the intergenerational transfer of knowledge, teaching and learning as a component of successful curriculum pedagogy and assessment. So it's a little bit what Brent was saying, like to be an effective learner, you also have to be an effective teacher, and being open to different kinds of teachers will lead a community to be more resilient. So it's just 2 cents.
Good. Well, amazingly enough, I don't know if anybody feels like we've been together for an hour, but we've almost been together for an hour now. And I think we're making some good headway here. Again, our goal here is not to design the whole curriculum for Mars. It's to give us a framework so that if we want to take this beyond just the playfulness of today's session and continue meeting as a group to say, what can we do through shaping EDU to have an influence on this in a positive way? Here's a summary that I've got so far. Correct me if I'm wrong on this. Let's fine tune this. For curriculum, the key word here is flexibility. Erin noted that in the chat, and I'm hearing that from Robert and many other people. So it's flexibility with an eye toward a system/approach that involves adapting quickly to changing situations and using every available resource to support learning that responds to a well-defined need. Does that give us a framework where we could be talking about this and actually doing something? I see we've just got Bajer in with teaching and learning. Let's make sure that we get that in there. So toward a teaching and learning system.
Yeah, I like what Robert said, and that probably could be built into the assessments when we start talking about it. How do we assess how we teach and how we learn from each other?
Does everybody have access to that planning document that Brett talked about? It's our report out sheet. You have that in the chat. You had a link a while back there. If you do have that, I'm going to suggest an exercise that we quite frequently use in some of the committee meetings I'm involved in with Shaping EDU. Or if you go into the document and bop your way down to the recommendations section, which I think at this point is page 2 of 3, you'll see what I've gone in for curriculum. I'm going to keep the initial thing I've got there. I'm going to make a copy of that so we don't lose the original formation of it. And what I would recommend is, you can probably see my cursor on that second one for curriculum. Let's take a few minutes and go in there and just maul that thing. Add words that you think should be in there. Take out phrases you don't think. And let's see what we come up with as an alternative or a further developed thing beyond our initial statement of what curriculum might mean to us on Mars, taking it back to Earth later. Everybody understand the challenge here? Great. I see names appearing there.
Just going to do a check for understanding. So you want us to go into the topic description or the important subtopics, like which section specifically?
I want you to go down to the recommendation section.
Okay.
Where you'll see that there is a bold italic thing that says for curriculum.
Got
and an underlined statement. I've copied that, and I see a few people are already playing with it. Go into the second version so we keep the first one pristine. Do not make any changes yet in the first one, but use the second one to just maul it and write over each other. This is like a synchronous conversation where you're not hearing voices, but you're seeing voices. It can be a very productive way to fine-tune a statement.
Love it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You said the first version and the second version. I only see one version here.
Okay. What can you put your cursor on the right side of the document and tell me what you're seeing in terms of what page shows up? You should see a thing that says page 2 of 3.
Oh, here. Okay, here I see it. So
let's separate that out just a little bit more there. For any of you watching the archive version, in case it's not 100% clear what's going on, because I'm not sure whether you'll see the live screen there, we now have the document that we're sharing. People are going in and rewriting the statement that I captured from the first part of our conversation. Out of this, we're hoping to come up with something we can report back later in today's conference that may become an action item for us down the road through Shaping EDU and other organizations that are inspired by the work we're doing here today. And again, I'm not sure what people will see out of the recordings. I'll just do a little bit of background description here so that you're up to speed on what's happening. It's a fun process. If you've never tried this, I highly recommend getting a shared document with colleagues, especially if you're working in different places, because you can just see people's thoughts rolling out there. It's all changing as I speak, but beyond our first line, which seems to be held pretty steadily so far, keyword here is flexibility with an eye toward a teaching and learning system or approach that involves adapting quickly to changing situations. We're now seeing that evolve into, with an eye toward an iterative, multi-generational, collaborative teaching and learning approach that involves personalizing and adapting curriculum to rapidly changing situations in the real world. What's going on? The process is evolving as we take a few minutes to do this exercise.
Okay, can I throw out something kind of odd?
Absolutely, there are no limits here.
The word curriculum,
Yeah.
as we're discussing it, is feeling very rigid and archaic.
Okay.
to me.
What would you suggest in its place?
I don't know. I'm just throwing that out because when I hear the word curriculum, it's like something that's pretty well set. And if we're talking about flexibility and adaptability, projects, it's not a great word, but it comes closer to what I feel like we're describing.
I've just added something. I'm going to try to differentiate this from everything else. I put it in bold beyond, just below the paragraph we've got. So an observation from you is that the word curriculum feels rigid and archaic. For those of you that are not totally immersed in, I'm having trouble spelling archaic, sorry. For those of you not totally immersed in redefining that statement on curriculum, brainstorm here, put words in under that line that I've just put in. The word curriculum feels rigid and archaic. What other words come to mind that might replace that? Don't filter, just put anything in.
Paul, so I'm kind of back. Sorry, I had to drop out for a minute there. Do people need a break?
What I'd love to suggest, Brandon, is let's go about another 5 minutes. We're in the exercise of retuning the curriculum description that we've got in there. And we've got a sub-conversation going on where somebody observed that the word curriculum feels rigid and archaic, and we're looking for other words that might replace that. So people are doing what you and I normally do in Shaping EDU sessions, where in the shared document, we're getting some ideas down to see where we go.
Yep, I'm there.
Once we finish this, we'll debrief, and I think that would be a perfect time for a break if everybody agrees.
Okay, sounds good.
And you, Brent, if you're not in there already, feel free to jump in yourself. I know you do great editing work on that. It'd be good to have your eyes in there.
I'll put my glasses on.
All right, then. You can have mine. I'm not using them. Where'd you go? I should have said this earlier, for anybody watching the archive version of this, please use this time while we're brainstorming to be writing down your own thoughts. You can be bringing it back into your own environments, which will carry the conference into a whole different level of activity and influence out there. And I might also prep you if you want to come into any of the meetings that come out of this in an ongoing basis for Shaping EDU. A quick reality check. I'm seeing the typing slow down a little bit. Are we getting to the point where we think we've got a good, workable first draft of a description for curriculum? And then the second question will be, do we want to change it out from curriculum to some other word? So let's start with a thing. I'll read that out loud for anybody that needs to hear it because you can't see it. What we now have in an adapted version is for curriculum. The key words here are flexibility and adaptability with regards to what learners learn, with an eye toward an interactive, multi-generational, collaborative teaching and learning approach that involves personalizing and adapting curriculum to rapidly changing situations in the real world. We would apply this to teaching and learning on Mars. Every available resource to support lifelong learning that responds to a well-defined need should be captured and transparently grounded in objectives. And people show working. This is great. We will not stop the editing of this until we have the formal report out later today. And then if we still have access to this document, we can continue learning or using it. Now, moving down to the second thing, which I think is very intriguing and takes us down an interesting road. Yeah, curriculum does imply a lot of stuff. And if we're in a whole new environment on Mars and want to carry that back to Earth at some point, what might we use to describe it? The suggestions so far are experiences, content standards, learning content, education/learning, learning framework, learning experience, learning modules, transferable knowledge, transformation through learning, objectives, challenges, explorations, plans, and goals. What resonates with you? Is there a new term that more accurately captures the system we want to create on Mars with an eye toward bringing it back to Earth? Thoughts? Okay, interactive exercise. Take any of those words there. The three that speak most loudly to you, put a 1, 2, or 3 after them, and let's see what the numbers show us. So if you like experiences as number 1, put a number 1 there.
I like experience only as it speaks to something a bit more specific. Curriculum is often used to talk to the to speak to the aggregate, right, of learning experiences. So I'm not sure what the perfect replacement is for that.
If you've got an alternate you want to offer up, great time to do that.
Yeah, I just threw the word pathway in there. I think that it's maybe a more, I mean, they exist now, right? So there's a modern analog, but instead of a curriculum, which is, I believe, derived from a Latin word, like a course, basically like a chariot would run, like a course, which is predefined, right? A pathway can be more organic. It can be more adaptive. I mean, if you walk down any path, you'll see cement roads and then you'll see dirt trails. And guess which one was created organically because people decided to go that way. You'll see this on any college campus, right? The organic paths will create themselves as students decide that they don't want to take the long road. So maybe that would be a good word to add there.
Okay, you just won me over. I've added another one to that. Nicely done, sir.
Yeah.
It's interesting how this is shaping out. There are a couple of obvious first choices for everybody, which may take us right where we want to get here. Anybody need more time to put the numbering in, or anybody want to make a case for any of the other terms that may not be getting the attention that you think they deserve?
I'm just curious on what the difference might be between experiences and then learning experience. Are they really the same thing? Or are people looking at them as different? Because it's interesting to see the voting differences. I'm just curious.
I think, Brent, what we're really looking at is the term to capture things. So people are saying that the combination of learning experience is more descriptive of what we're trying to get to than simply the word experience.
And I think I don't want to forget what Noah wrote in the side that says learning experience design. That kind of also wraps it up if you're looking at it that way. That's just my thoughts. Because that's not on this list. The learning experience design did not make it to this list.
I like pathway or journey for the larger, for the sequence. So I'll buy that for the sequence. And then if you're talking about a discrete experience, then a learning experience.
I like what you said, Noah, journey. I like the explorations, pathway, journey. Those words jump out at me.
Learning pathway, learning pathways.
Journeys.
Learning journeys. Ooh, we're going, oh, here we go.
I just threw a lifelong learning journey, which is the verbiage I used to describe learning pathways when I was at Bajer, C-Sky. It's all over their website because we're talking about lifelong learners here. So I usually refer to it as a lifelong learning journey consisting of multiple pathways.
So I'm going to ask, why do we have to keep putting learning in there? Because that seems to separate it out from the experience itself or how it's applicable to something. It seems to put it back into a neat education box.
It does leave out games from which you're not learning anything useful.
But wait, games are very important. There's a in learning. Play is so important with learning.
I qualified that by saying games in which you're not learning anything useful.
I think it's very useful. I'm challenging you because I think that games provide lots of useful information, and play does. And
I agree with
play,
both of those statements, that games and
okay.
play can be very educational and provide learning experiences. Yes.
Okay. There's a book on it if you want to know it.
What we're really focusing here on is the challenge of saying, is curriculum an antiquated, archaic word, and do we want something to replace it that's easily understandable and playful, meaningful, and inspirational? And I think that's what we're trying to get to with these terms. Again, we're not locking ourselves into it. I think we're being forward thinking in the spirit of shaping EDU here and in this conference of saying, let's rethink things. What's not working? What could be better? What could inspire us as a community to produce positive actions? No right or wrong answers here. What I'm seeing right now is that learning experience got the most votes for number one. And I'm seeing a strong discussion around pathways or lifelong, well, actually nobody's voting for lifelong learning journeys, but I'm seeing pathways there as a strong runner-up in terms of things that are getting us to where we want. So it feels like either learning experience or learning experience pathways is sort of what we're leading toward. Let's let that rest for a little bit. Let's take the break that we've been talking about taking. What do you think? 10, 15 minutes? What do you need as a time to actually decompress a little bit, think through, reflect on this, and come back ready to jump into the next topic? Thoughts from anybody?
Let's do 10, Paul.
What was the last thing you just said?
Oh, let's do 10, I
10?
said.
Okay, so here's what we'll do. I will stop the recording as soon as I finish giving this explanation. We'll take 10 minutes. If you want to stay in the room and continue the conversation off camera, perfectly fine. If you need a break to get up and walk around, stretch yourself, fine too. We'll reconvene in 10 minutes, which Pacific time will make it about 10:20. Thanks, everybody. The recording is going off now, and we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes. Those of you watching the archive version, welcome back. You were probably never gone because we just gave you about a 10-minute break that you didn't experience. We had a little bit of backstory conversation there. We're going to return one last time to that shared document we've been working on based on some of the exchanges that we've had. And we'll move on to the next theme that we want to explore in the time we've got together here. We currently have, and it looks like the numbers have not changed very much, a couple of things that respond to the question of, if curriculum is archaic, what might work better? We've got learning experience, and we've got, now I'm missing the other one, pathways got a lot of work there. So anything from the group in terms of either settling on one of those for today or combining it? Do we want to do something like learning experience pathways? What's the wisdom of the group here in terms of what we're comfortable reporting back to the whole audience? Oh, we did get from Laura, departure points is yet another possible term here. If you were going to replace curriculum with another word or set of terms, what would that look like? Don't make me open the airlocks, people. It's going to get ugly here.
I think learning pathways sounds good to me.
Sounds good to me too, especially for the larger project.
A few more people report in. Let's make sure this isn't 2 or 3 voices giving us the thing. Learning. Okay, we've got learning pathways up. Somebody asked during the break about the voting system we've got up here. Learning pathways is now up there. Go right below that, put in a yes or no, and let's see if we agree on that.
What about combining 2? Because I like the milestones that I didn't see who put it in B, I think. What about pathways and milestones? Doesn't that sort of summarize what a curriculum is?
Yeah, I included milestones. So just thinking back to the system that I created while I was at Bajer and like C-Sky, there's basically learning pathways, and then within those are milestones. So it's generally how I think about it. I'm like a model person. I'm always thinking about systems. So like learning pathways and then milestones within those pathways, because one pathway might include, let's say, 3 milestones, like project management, right? And then let's say you are done with that pathway, the final milestone would lead you to a different kind of maybe product management, right? So like Six Sigma or Lean or something like that. So those pathways are kind of like forks in the road, right? Like once you've reached the end of a pathway, or maybe in the middle of a pathway, your objectives change, right? Like you decide, well, I don't want to work at Apple, I want to work at Tesla, right? Or something like that. So instead of waterfall, which is not something Tesla uses, but is a foundational skill, then that would lend itself to like Lean Six Sigma, which is something that Tesla or automotive manufacturers, physical manufacturers might use in addition to, or maybe Agile, right? So let's say you decide to go to Apple and you want to build software, right? So like you're not going Lean Six Sigma, you're probably going in the direction of like Agile development or something like that. So each of those would be milestones along a pathway.
Okay, we now have, from our original yes or no question about learning pathways, we have 3 competitors in the running. Let's rethink this. We got 16 people. Let's get every possible vote we can have. A +1 for learning pathways, or a +1 for learning milestones, or a pathway for, I'm sorry, a +1 for pathways and milestones.
I just want to say I agree with oh, my video's not, sorry. I agree with Robert. I like the idea of pathways with milestones within the pathway, if that makes sense, not part of the overall name, because I love that pathways feels personal, like whatever pathway you choose to go on and you can change at any time, and the milestones are the moments of assessment. So I really, Robert, when you said it, it just very much made sense to me. So thank you.
I guess the metaphor is like a walk in the woods, right? We're always back to that. Like, you know, my path is going to look different than your path depending on our objectives for that particular stroll.
Yeah, and it's all a journey, right? So like all these words are kind of combining together, but I think the pathway is so visual, and I think it makes sense. I don't know, it's clear to me that you're on a journey going somewhere to something, whatever that may be. And as they say, it's not always the destination, right? It's the journey. And so that's what is really being explored here too, I think.
Good. Well, for those of you that have voted, thank you so much. It looks to me like out of 16 of us, a majority of us have put our pluses next to learning pathways. That does not preclude us using the other ones down the road, but if we're going to report out of all this today, I would say one big reporting area is when we looked at the issue of curriculum, the first thing is we recognize if we're going on Mars and we want to start from scratch, curriculum is an antiquated, archaic word, and we can do better. And what we've come up with as a starting point is learning pathways, because it implies that there are going to be things that you accomplish and there are concrete results that come out of it. So does that capture the sense of the group so far? Lovely. Brent, I'm going to go ahead and move that up into the notes. Can you lead us into the second part of our 3-part exploration, decide whether our next thing is going to be assessments or pedagogy?
I certainly can. And then are we going to clean up that recommendations area? Is that what you're saying you're going to do? You're going to capture that someplace else so we don't lose these notes and then just solidify it down?
Under recommendations, I'm going to go into and do 2 things right now. The reworded for curriculum thing, I'm going to have there, but I'm going to put a preface to it, which is the voting we just took. I'm going to pick up a comment that somebody just made, learning as a walk in the woods, and say that we voted for learning pathways as something that is forward thinking and replaces the antiquated term curriculum. And then I'm going to leave curriculum in because it ties back to what Shaping ED is expecting for us, but I'll add in learning pathways as an alternate term.
Gotcha. All right, excellent. So from curriculum, do we then move to Gosh, pedagogy. I mean, that is a monster in itself. I'm going to vote to move to assessment or milestones, because that was one of the things that somebody said, is that the milestones are like the assessment. And I made a little note of that down there because I thought that was really good. What do you think? Do we want to go to pedagogy or do we want to jump to assessment? Because part of the pedagogy, I think I was hearing already, was like experiential, intergenerational. Those are some words that I remember being talked about there. And how do people feel like that's it? I mean, because that seemed to be a very big theme going on, right? And I'm just kind of synthesizing what was said. So you're always allowed to say, no, that's not what we meant. Pound sand, Brent, go away. And that's okay. But that's what I was hearing, like our pedagogical stance is really more of that interactive, and hopefully someone's remembering this, interactive experiential learning versus maybe book learning. Thoughts?
I mean, I think pedagogy is a pretty interesting place to hang out with for a while if others
Sure.
are interested. I mean, it keeps us in the more conceptual place in terms as opposed to the more applied, you know, focusing on skills and outcomes and things like that. So it just depends on the, you know, where folks want to go with this conversation. There was the suggestion to focus on decolonizing the curriculum. That could come in under pedagogy. I'd love to hear more about that.
Agreed.
So Paul and I are really good at waiting you out, just so you know.
And I'm only half listening because I'm still kind of reframing things so that we can return to this before our time together ends. So I'll rejoin this actively in a few minutes.
So I'm gonna reach out based on the introductions. Bailey, as a student, and I know you work over at Edson. Say hi to Tracy Lee, and Brent over there. What do you see in this case? I mean, what would you? Yes, we're going to Mars, but also based on your experience as a student.
Yeah. I mean, like being in a teacher preparation program is like just an interesting perspective to come at this with. Like, I think we talk a lot about, and I have a hard time focusing on pedagogy without thinking about the way that we teach teachers how to implement pedagogy in a way that's right, you know? And so, it also takes me back to like what we talked about on day one of this conference with the next education workforce stuff going on at the Teachers College at ASU, like having this team of teachers and team of educators like implementing learning, and how that can be like just a much more effective approach to it. So yeah, I mean, I think like experiential learning, project-based learning, we talked about, like I went to the session on museum schools. I've been to other conferences that talk about things like community schools, and just like ways to implement like holistic supports for students and learners, and what that looks like in like lifelong learning and adult learning, I'm not sure, but I think just like having a system in place where there's a team of people there to support the learners in those processes, and the people that are supporting those learners are also trained and prepared to implement that kind of learning. Like, I think a lot of the teacher prep programs we see nowadays can stay like stuck in this, you know, here's the set of standards and here's how you teach them, out like without navigating outside of that typical structure. So I don't know, there's lots to think about, but yeah, I have a hard time coming at pedagogy without considering the way we educate the educators, I guess, too.
Good points. Thank you.
Another thought that came to mind when I was thinking about pedagogical systems, like very broadly, is this tension, I'll use that word again, between like prescriptive pedagogical practices and descriptive pedagogical practices. So what I mean by prescriptive is this is what you got to do. And some pedagogy requires you to align with a very prescriptive methodology. So like if you're teaching a surgeon how to do heart surgery, you don't want them to be winging it, right? You don't want necessarily like, you know, their particular approach. You know, they can build on top of a prescriptive pedagogical practice in the best interest of their patients, but they need to conform to a particularly prescriptive pedagogy to ensure that that surgeon, right, requires, you know, certain, just using the word milestones, right? You have to meet certain milestones, and then beyond that is up to you. But descriptive pedagogy lends itself to more personalized, like competency-based learning models where, you know, I might ask Stephanie and Laura to demonstrate a skill or competency, but I've created some flexibility in the pedagogy for Laura's learning environment versus Stephanie's learning environment, which could be very different in terms of what language they speak, what age they are, what the technology they have access to. And it lends itself to sort of like a pedagogical agnostic approach. So those are just the two words that came to mind, like at a super high level when it came to pedagogy. It was this idea of prescriptive versus descriptive pedagogy.
Thank you.
Robert, can I sort of, maybe this is one way to work on finding that balance. Something we haven't talked about, and I'm kind of harking back to something you said earlier and to my military experience, is that in the military, things don't always go right, okay? I mean, and there is this sort of, these are the parameters, we don't care how you get to that solution, get there. That's very much how it's structured. It's not do this, do this, do this, do this. And one of the things that they use is something called a lessons learned document. And when something doesn't go as expected or something goes wrong, they investigate and document that so that in the future it's understood. It's that institutional knowledge passing down. And I think that's one thing we haven't talked about at all is the importance of documentation in this setting up this new school, because you don't want it to just be touchy-feely, you know, loosey-goosey, and then, you know, the next generation, they have to learn it all again.
Yeah, I added a bit in the comments about reflection. I think that some of what you're talking about reminds me of like deeper learning practices, if anybody wants to look that up. And a critical component of deeper learning is a summative reflection, and it's part of the assessment is evaluating that reflection, looking at, you know, how has learning this skill or competency benefited your practice specifically? How will you employ this skill or competency in the future? And that reflection can be a really valuable component in moving the entire system forward. Is everybody taking the same thing away? Are they different? What can we learn from Laura's experience versus Stephanie's experience? And we can use that reflection as an artifact to reinforce that system and for that system to evolve into the future. It lends itself really well to diversity as well, that diversity of opinions. You know, Laura and Stephanie are going to take two completely different things out of it maybe, and does that have to do with the learning experience? Does it have to do with the learning environment? Does it have to do with, you know, your experience going into it, your point in the pathway, right? If you get started on a skill early in a pathway, are the outcomes different than if, you know, you've been a teacher for 30 years kind of thing? Sometimes I call this the my mom and I test, because my mom has been a teacher for decades and I was a teacher for about 5 years. And when I was thinking about how skills and competencies are employed in the classroom and how they're recognized in existing practice, they need to fit both use cases for the skill or competency to be valuable for the industry, for the sector. It needs to benefit both stakeholders equally. So it's just something, two thoughts.
I love this, and I think it kind of speaks to the museum schools model, where documentation is a key part of the model, and then they have to present what they've learned and their documentation to others to share what they've learned. And I think that could be part of the milestone process, right? Is having that documentation and then sharing it out. And perhaps the assessment comes from that. So I think these are really key points to our curriculum or our pathways. And I also want to challenge us to think about, like, in addition to the learner pathways, what about the educators? Is there something that we should be not assessing, but how do they continue to learn and grow? Is it just 360 in that what they're teaching, but also what are they learning? I know we talked about keeping the educators central to this model too. And is there a way to make sure that they are growing on their pathway as well as part of this?
I agree with that, Stephanie and Robert. And, I've been thinking a lot about museums and how we can draw so much from what they do and how we can integrate the way we learn and teach. And what I really love about museums is that they focus a lot on history. And for many of us, our memories are short, right? So I think there's value in really understanding and remembering our past, because it's so easy to just repeat, the mistakes of the past. We still see them today.
So someone had posted, who was it? Kelly, you posted, I don't even know if I want to even try to say that. Hutigaji, right? We're going to Sweden or something like that. So self-determined learning. You want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. I'm not it's not something that I've studied, but in a meeting last summer, someone was talking about, there's pedagogy, andragogy, and hutagogy, and it's like, well, why are we so, we just said that, sorry, I lost the words. We just said that curriculum is antiquated. Well, maybe we were stuck in pedagogy, and maybe we need to kind of throw that open. So, with the self-directed learning, it's what we see people doing with YouTube. It's like, oh, need to fix my sink, and I can go to YouTube and get, okay, here are the videos, and now I know the tools that I need that I can't find in my garage, so I can go get them, and then I can do this. Or, oh, I want to plant this in my garden. I don't know what to do with it. I can get these resources, and I can go to my public library. I can go to my phone. I can do, I can do that and say, like, this is what I want to know, and I can do it. So, moving away from that, well, there's the teacher, and the teacher's going to design this, and we're going to do it in these steps. When you have that self-directed learning, it's, okay, I know that, I can build on that, and I don't need to take those steps back. I can keep moving forward.
Excellent, thank you. So some of the ideas for some summarizing up a little bit here. I think when we talk about pedagogy, we can talk about learner-centered, experiential learning, project-based learning, also things like museum schools, community schools, etc. Paul, I gotta grab this, sorry.
Okay, I was just trying to grab a definition of the words that we've been kicking around here. So a challenge to all of us right now is the idea that as we were looking at the word curriculum and thinking maybe that's outdated, perhaps part of our thinking here has to be, what's a better word for pedagogy? Ideas?
Maybe growth experience, learning experience, growth experience.
How about if we do the exercise we did before? Right now, I'm back in the document. There's a lot of text in there, by the way. If you jump down to where I am in page 4 of the document, I'm going to put a new heading in here, which is very simply new terms for pedagogy. And let's brainstorm that. Go ahead and type in any terms that come to mind, and let's see if we can do a similar exercise to what we did a minute ago, and then circle back and figure out, so how does that affect the approach we're going to take? While you're doing that, I'm going to grab a definition of that final term that we've been kicking around here. Again, for any of you that are watching a recording of this, in case you're not seeing what's happening on the screen, people are now typing in suggestions for new terms for pedagogy. They include things as basic as teaching, learning facilitation, method of instruction, transformation, scaffolding, word we've been kicking around, pedagogy, practice, guide, map, team. If you're available for time travel and you're watching the archive version now, travel back in time, join the conversation here and type in your own terms. Remember, we're on Mars today. Almost anything's possible, right? What I may do just to make the recording make sense here is I'm going to stop the recording long enough for us to finish our brainstorming. And as soon as we finish that, then I'll start it again. Sorry for those of you that just sat through 2 or 3 minutes going, what are they doing? Okay, those of you watching the archive version, you have just missed about 10 minutes of silence, so we've spared you that. What we've been doing is putting down, hang on, I'm getting a message here about whether I want to cancel the recording. I do not want to cancel the recording. So there we go. All right. We have just been engaging in trying to reframe the terminology we're using here. We've got quite a variety of terms up. To summarize very briefly, as soon as I can get my screen to show me what we were just talking about, looks to me like we've got somewhere around 15 or 20 different terms up here. A quick reading of the list. If we were to replace the word pedagogy with something that we think would work in our newly created learning environment on Mars and then carry back to Earth, the words include framework, design system, step, teaching, learning facilitation. somebody made a comment that it's almost like a trail guide or a park ranger field guide or map for a walk in the woods. And I'm seeing a lot of enthusiasm for that particular thing based on the voting that's taking place at a preliminary level within our shared document. Continuing on, other terms that have been suggested are method of instruction, learning experience and design, transformation journey, scaffolding, back to pedagogy, which again, we were comparing and contrasting with pedagogy and andragogy or androgyny, or however you want to say it. Not androgynous, that's a whole different issue, right? Practice, guide, learning theory, map. Approach is getting a couple of votes there, simply the word approach instead of pedagogy. Learning approach, learning gateway, expedition. We're back to the theme here of the ranger meeting. Somebody's observed that we are, through the work we're doing, patrolling protected areas, monitoring wildlife, preventing poaching, engaging local communities in conservation, helping communities resolve human-wildlife conflicts, assisting with tourism. Ranger work is often grueling. It reminds me of learning facilitation. Back to terms, learner-centered experiences, Mars expedition planning, coaching, application, mentorship, learning model, concept mapping, first principles. So let's bring it home, group. If we are looking at the idea of getting a word that replaces pedagogy and invites people to be part of this process, which of those many terms we have up there, a combination of those terms, might be descriptive and inviting to people? Thoughts? No thoughts. If you're not careful, I'm going to have Brent play his harmonica again. Could be dangerous.
I really like to ever put in field guide. It doesn't sound like this is the way you have to do it, but it sounds like it's full of useful information. Like if I'm going to Yosemite, I want a field guide that tells me about bears, what I should do, with my food, all of that. I don't want to be thumbing through it and have it say, if a bear is chasing you, do this first, do this second, do this third. It gives me useful information. It's easy to reference. It just sounds like something useful and understandable that you don't have to have the lingo for.
Other thoughts, reactions to that?
I agree with that, Laura. And I noticed this bullet below that about like the ranger meeting. Like, I don't know who added that, but like patrol protected areas, monitor wildlife and stuff like that. Whole side of it too, I think like can contribute to that field guide. And it both kind of reminds me of like the learning facilitation side of things. Like there are individuals or like a team of educators or something who are kind of like maybe laying the groundwork or setting like some general expectations for what learning might look like, but still giving you the freedom to like explore and just use the field guide as like a set of advice but alongside like general expectations so that learning still happens, especially when we talk about K-12. I feel like that's a little bit still important. I mean, you can't just like put a kindergartner in a room and like expect them to figure it out. I mean, there are ways to do that, but there needs to be some sort of general guidelines. So I like the two of those sort of combined together.
Keep going, others. Let's bounce through this.
I like field guide as well. I was just going to add that. I mean, what works for me is that it feels open-ended, it feels self-directed, it feels fun, and it does a lot of things for us. But what it doesn't do, or I'm struggling with, is it doesn't acknowledge the social element of learning. And it feels like a lot of times when we break things down into learning into its discrete learning elements and really try and atomize learning and get analytical about it, we forget how important that sort of the broader cohort is in our social interaction. So I don't know how to pull that back in exactly, but I'm just putting that out there.
Open to suggestions here. Anybody see a way to pull social learning or social into our proposed term of field guide here?
So wouldn't that be underneath that? Like field guide is the bigger piece, and then you would have hard skills versus soft skills, for lack of a better terminology, right? And you'd have both of those aspects felt underneath that field guide.
I think it could be. I just need to grapple with it in my head of what's the metaphor then. Yeah.
Maybe going back to what Robert said about his learning experience, and my daughter is is young. She's a Daisy Girl Scout, and like you have a field guide, and all the troops use the field guide. So like the field guide can be used as an individual, but it can also be used within a group.
Yeah, I'm going to add to what Kelly just said. And Laura commented a community field guide. And I actually really, like, I was on the fence about field guide because it just felt like we were going too far down like the metaphor rabbit hole. But field guides are super useful. But I really like the idea of a community field guide because then you can facilitate a conversation about what community, right? So like as a former scout, I can tell you straight up that I would use a field guide endorsed by, produced by like folks in the Northeast where I'm from, versus like a field guide that might cover the entire United States, right? Like the resolution changes depending on what community you're talking about. And I think the community field guide phrasing lends itself very well to that social aspect that Noah was talking about, because it opens up a dialogue about what community exactly is this field guide in service to, which is ultimately like the point of a field guide is to provide a service really to like whether you're a scout or something, like we know this stuff. This is stuff you might want to know. I really like community field guide a lot.
So we've now narrowed it down to two potential competitive terms here, field guide or community field guides. The document did jump around a little bit as a result of my pasting and cutting some stuff into the upper parts of it. So you should now be on page 5 of 6 of the shared document. My cursor is right there if you want to follow that down. Let's do the +1 thing, vote for field guide or community field guide.
And I'm wondering, Noah, does the community part resonate with you in helping you with the struggle you were having? Because community does kind of put in that social idea, at least in my mind, it does.
I actually just like field guide by itself because it's cleaner, but I think the word community does address the social notion. So I don't know. I was just trying to, I'm still trying to work through it, but I think we're going in a good direction.
I'm also just thinking about like field guides that I've had experience with in my professional career. So like thinking about those field guides I used when I was a teenager in Scouts, like those were more descriptive than prescriptive. There were best practices in there, but they weren't broad, they weren't so specifically applicable in most cases that they would like apply to everybody. Versus, and I've had a million jobs, versus when I was an EMT, I would have like standard operating procedures. So I would have like SOPs for how we respond to emergency situations. And those were a lot more prescriptive because they were more specifically applicable. So they specifically applied to like first responders, paramedics, these kinds of things. So I think like that resolution idea of prescriptive and descriptive can be variable against something like a community field guide. Again, like what community are you talking about? Are you talking about 14-year-olds in the woods? Or are you talking about like adult people who are responding to emergency crises? So I think being able to play with that resolution within that same terminology would lend itself really well to a variety of different types of field guides, which would be interesting. Just thinking out loud here.
So far, I'm seeing 6 votes in there. There's 16 of us in the room. Let's get a few more votes in there or a few more comments. If neither of those appeal to you, let's hear from you as to where your thinking is in terms of what word we would replace and use in place of pedagogy.
I have one. I was like very pro community, and now I'm doubting it for one reason I wanted to just bring up with the group is community and belonging, right? And like, do you feel you belong to this community? What community do I belong to? If I don't use this field guide, am I not a part of this community or accepted in this community? So that's the belonging factor in making sure it's inclusive. Community, the term community can kind of go both ways. So just something to be mindful of.
That's where I was sort of going with my thoughts, is I almost wanted, for the community, I almost wanted a declaration of values. And then, but the field guide could be for a specific area of inquiry. And there's got to be overlap between the two.
Yeah. This is tricky.
So is what I'm hearing from that is that there's field guides, but there's multiple ones, and one of them would be a community field guide. Is that what's kind of being said? And then we don't have to go that deep, right? We stick at the field guide level. Although more votes are going for community field guide right now, just so you know.
I'm just holding us on for a few more seconds. It looks like we're almost at the point of having a majority of people having voted. Who is shifting? This is kind of like election night. Watch that happen. Again, for those of you watching the archive version, if you're going, what's going on over there? We started with almost all votes going for the title Community Field Guide, and now it's shifting a little bit, and Field Guide is catching up. It's like a horse race. 1, 2, 3.
It's actually tied right now.
Oh, it's getting so exciting. I have to go take a nap.
Oh, no, Community Field Guide just lost votes. And Community Field Guide is dropping back 2 lengths. I told you, play is important.
Get some Red Bull for the Community Field Guide. It's losing out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, okay. We're almost at a majority of the group. I'm just going to give us a few more seconds. And I'm going to stack this in the deck.
I think a whole bunch of ballots just came in.
Yeah, no more counting those ballots. We don't want those. What's happening? No, we're not going to go down that road either.
Who's voting twice?
I've only voted 5 times.
I voted for, but it was for, barbecue pork with broccoli, and that.
I didn't see that on the menu, Brent.
Yeah.
See, Paul's cheating. He's voting for different IP addresses. That's how he gets away with it.
I'm already down on item 4. I'm not voting just because I like the idea of seeing this come out clean. There goes my change of votes. Look at that, folks. Field Guide now has a majority of the group. Community Field Guide is a poor second, also ran. So we have a new term to propose in place of pedagogy, which is field guides. Now let us do what we did a few minutes ago. We're going to jump back up into this document.
Yep.
And see if we can create some kind of a statement that supports that. And that would put us at page 3. What I've started to do there for those of you in the live document is I'm highlighting stuff in kind of a light blue. That will be what we use for our presentation when we're back with the full group. We have just a jumble of words under for pedagogy. The key here is, and then a few things I pulled up. Let's mold that statement and let's talk about doing something similar to what we did for curriculum. And to refresh your memory, with curriculum, we came up with the following statement. The key word here is flexibility, or the key words are flexibility and adaptability with regards to what learners learn. We want to work toward creating an interactive, multi-generational, collaborative teaching and learning approach. And then it went on from there. So let us, in our statement for section 2, talk about the key words and what we want to work toward.
So I just read Noah's post, and I do like a community declaration of values plus field guides for areas of inquiry, because we do that in practice. It sets down the parameters in general. We say no hate speech, no, be conscious that your stuff is going to be on the internet forever. Don't give out your, we have certain parameters for the safety and protection of the group. And I think that community declaration of values plus field guides is a good combination, because we address both when we teach.
And some of those could be social etiquette, but some of those could also be more pedagogical in bent, such as if we have a sort of a philosophy of learning, or first of all, I think the decolonizing the curriculum could work its way into this area, but also if there's some sort of open democratic, or this notion that learners will be self-directed, that could somehow come in or contribute according to their expertise. That could be another area. And And then there are other things like mental health could also work their way in, well-being.
Okay, so again, calling your attention, I think it's page 3 of the 6, and I've got my cursor at the top of that. We have some writing to do here as quickly as we can. Our starting point is as follows for pedagogy. The key words are, and what we want to work toward is. Now let's start filling that out so we've got a statement that we can make to people and invite them to be part of the process. Again, I think just for making the recording a little bit more useful for people, since we're mostly typing here, again, I'll stop the recording briefly so people don't have to sit through that, and then we'll come back to what we have as a final statement. So here we go offline for about 3 to 5 minutes. Those of you that just saw the recording stop and start automatically, what we've done is about 10 minutes of really effective and productive brainstorming, coming up with a statement that we are going to report back to the larger group. Here is where we're at the moment. For item 2 under pedagogy, our starting point here again was to question the terminology and try to find something more descriptive and inviting. A quick brainstorming session led us to choose the term field guide to tell teachers and learners how we are approaching the world, the work and our work, rather than using pedagogy. So for our pedagogy field guide area, the keywords here are facilitating and fostering inclusive learning experiences as a practice and approach endeavor for a diverse community of lifelong learners. Take a breath there. Okay, what we want to work toward is an approach, a field guide that engages learners and lends itself to the application of learning objectives, otherwise known as outcomes. Nice word, that one. This approach also utilizes and leverages active, personalized, reflective of learning and experiences, sharing out new understandings, and practicing transfer of knowledge and skills. So we got the action there. We are transferring knowledge and skills for a productive purpose and a definable purpose. Field guides are utilized, we note, by communities that share a common interest and adhere to a declaration of common values and best practices. And that's where we want to be, for better or for worse. So given that we've been at this live here for about 2.5 hours almost, and about 40 minutes from now, we're going to go back into the general session. I'm going to recommend that our wonderful Mars colony here in this particular group take a brief break to decompress. We'll reconvene in about 10 minutes, which our time will be 11:30. And our last 15 or 20 minutes together we'll look over these final things, fine-tune things. We've made a decision not to try to tackle assessment in only 15 or 20 minutes. We feel like we're not going to get where we want to get at that level, but we want to leave that open to future conversations. So Shaping EDU and any other organization wants to be part of the conversation. So again, we're going to freeze or pause the recording. Those of you in the room, feel free to walk around, or we can informally chat for a little bit. We'll reconvene for our final part in about 10 minutes. And Brett, my screen just went wonky, so I lost my ability to freeze the recording. Can you? All right, so those of you that didn't feel the break, welcome back. I've got to observe something that is, I think, unique to Shaping EDU. A lot of people talk about when you're on a session and you feel Zoom fatigue, you just are so sorry that you sat there for hours and hours in front of a screen. But what we're seeing in our group during this session, for those of you in the live session, of course, every time we've taken a break, most people have stayed in for the informal conversation. And those people that, yeah, exactly. Stephanie's doing the magic dance, showing that we really rock it. And it's a lesson for those of you that weren't in for part of that and are only seeing the kind of clip version so that you didn't have to sit through the silences. Meetings are only as engaging as you make them. It doesn't matter whether they're online or face-to-face. What we're talking about training, teaching, learning in today's session being on Mars and in all the future conversations we hope to have, it's always make it engaging, make it real, make it productive. And that's what we're hoping to do in our last 15 or 20 minutes. So we have our statements for pedagogy, which is now field guides. We have our first session, which is so long ago now, I can't remember what we talked about, curriculum, which has become something entirely different. What we want to do now is acknowledge, A, that the conversations were so rich and fruitful. We are not going to try to tackle assessment in 15 or 20 minutes. We're going to kick that down the road for another conversation. What we want to come back to is the statements we've got and what we're going to be doing with this when we go back to the larger group and beyond that. So mechanical stuff here. First of all, let's decide based on the document we're using. We've got the thing on curriculum and the new title we gave it, and on pedagogy and the new title we gave it. Who in the group would like to take the first one and just read that when we report back to the whole group? Don't everybody say no at once.
You mean the sections in blue, Paul?
Exactly, yes.
I'll take the first one.
Okay, so Robert's going to do section 1. Who's going to do section 2? Stephanie? Was that a thumbs up?
Yeah,
I saw her.
I was thumbs up for Robert.
Well, she gave a thumbs up for
Careful,
Robert and just
Stephanie.
volunteered to do section 2. Thank you ever so
No,
much.
I'm happy to. I'm happy
All right.
to.
Stephanie's doing section 2. And what we need to do in the next few minutes is look back at that document toward the bottom and develop section 3, which is looking for the interlaps between what we've just been doing and how it's going to feed back into the other groups. And Laura's going to be leaving early. So Laura, you have to get in your final comments right now before you leave. Anything you want to say? Nice to put you on the spot. Maybe she already left. I can't see everybody that's on there.
No, I'm here. I don't know what time everybody's at, so I'm going to have to leave 15 minutes before the thing closes, before the conference closes. So.
Oh, okay. Got it.
That's why I'm not volunteering, because if we're at the end.
All right, so we have our 2 items of key intersections. Given the time we've got, let's give 5 minutes to each of those. Start with number 1, intersections with learning environments in the future. How is what we're talking about here potentially intersecting with learning environments of the future? And what can we do to draw that group into our work and draw ourselves into their group? Ideas, anybody? You speak, I'll capture, and then we'll condense it. I think we've got some generic ones in there. I don't think that anybody in the group put this in, but let's just play. Seeing one from Kelly there. So one possible source of intersection is to work outside traditional classrooms. Again, feel free to do what we've done all along. Let's get some ideas in there, or unmute yourself if you want me to type that in.
And I don't know if this matters, but the other 2 groups were learning environments of the future and leadership and culture. If you want to, if there's a need or desire to find
actually,
an intersectionality with those.
That's a great point, Brent, because that's at the bottom of the document. You can see where people are already typing in. Don't wait for me to prompt you. If you want to jump into intersection with leadership and culture also, let's do that and speed up the process.
Oh, that's what, okay. I thought we were just doing intersections in general. I didn't notice that there were 2 different areas.
Yeah,
sorry.
Like that set up. That's okay. There's so much to absorb here. And again, in case those of you watching the archived recording of this can't see what's happening on the screen, there are ideas flowing quickly and furiously here in the best of all possible ways. People are suggesting that intersections with our group and the learning environments of the future could include being place and pace agnostic, continuing to foster, actually, I think this was the ringer thing, continue to foster creativity and adaptability. Did anybody actually put that one in? If not, I'm going to take that out. I think that was generic. We're getting down to the real working ones here. So our ideas include working outside traditional classrooms, including the idea of integrating technology, et cetera, into curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment. Another intersection for us with learning environments of the future is adaptive, accessible spaces. Another one is empowering learners to construct personal pathways. There we go back to our pathways and journeys theme that we were kicking around. Construct personal pathways and share and connect with fellow travelers. Things that are coming in under the theme of intersections between our group and the group that's dealing with leadership and culture include consider funding allocations to value diversity, cross-cultural, multiple histories, not just the victor telling the stories here, team-focused leadership, our park ranger example coming into line there, where we got playful about field guides and rangers rather than using the typical academic vocabulary we've used for so long. Another idea is fostering community and belonging, a very important one for all of us. We've heard that theme run through some of the other presentations here in the Shaping EDU conference over the last few days. Sources and scholars beyond academic credentials is another one. And again, under intersections between our group and leadership and culture, encouraging personal growth. This is sort of like watching the voting that went on in our last section. The ideas are just flowing out there one over another, taking us in really nice, productive directions.
Just really fast, if anyone's interested in more on neurodiversity, last August, a group called Diversity Leadership Alliance, and I can grab the link. We had a webinar that was based on neurodiversity.
Yeah, I put that in there. If you want to throw it in the chat, that would be awesome. I'll watch that.
I mean, I'll put the chat to all of our stuff, because all of our stuff is on our website, so you can check it all out. And you can ignore this strange guy doing all the technical stuff. That was
a strange guy doing all the technical stuff is a heck of a good leader. I've been on some of the webinars you have led, and I appreciate the way you do those.
And you can see all the past stuff. So
yeah, Brent, this reminds me a little bit of like the universal design for learning, which is something that I absolutely love. And Steve Nordmark is part of that group, and it's like very close to his heart. And yeah, neurodiversity is critical, I think.
Again, for anyone watching the archive version, it's so much fun to be facilitating this with Brent and watch how this group is collaborating here. One of the last things that we're supposed to do before we report back to the whole group is fill out the section of these key intersections between our group and others. We started about 5 minutes ago with nothing in there. And over a 5-minute period, it's just exploding with ideas for collaboration with the other groups to make a positive change that's measurable in the learning environments we work in, and it contributes something with an overall cohesive vision of what learning can be, what teaching, training, learning can all be together when we put our minds together and we open ourselves up to different possibilities. Brent, I've done so much of the recap. Do you want to do that here and read what we've got so far so that people listening to the recording as well as our group can focus on the suggestions we've done?
I can give you a break, go get a drink.
Thank you.
So again, with the intersections with learning environments of the future, that seems to have settled down. So a place and pace agnostic, continuous improvement, work outside traditional classrooms. And then underneath that, we have a hands-on experience-based learning / practice, integrate technology into curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment, fieldwork, internships, apprenticeships, service learning. And then we also have adaptive, accessible spaces. We have empower learners to construct personal pathways and share and connect with fellow travelers. And then individual learning is not synonymous with learning alone. Intersections with leadership and culture are considering funding allocations to value diversity, crossing cultures, multiple histories, not just the victor, not just white male. We want to be looking at female, minorities, differently abled, etc. Team-focused leadership, and there's an idea of looking at it in terms of a park ranger example. Consider some type of statement around guiding pedagogical values, openness, inclusiveness, collegiality, examining bias, continually examining, reflecting, empowering individuals, groups to be self-directed, mental health, well-being, and accessibility. We're going to foster community and belonging. A lot coming out here, Paul, like we kind of started our conversation at like 7:30 this morning about that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging piece. Grounded in real, inclusive, and diverse stories, sources and scholars beyond academic credentials, encouraging personal growth that allows us to thrive, supports neurodiversity. Culture is continually developed through real-time adaptations to field guides, and then documentation preserves institutional knowledge. And as we're still reading, it's a holistic approach for traditional and non-traditional learners. So there's a lot going on there that I think there's lots of groups out there that would take this list and be overjoyed to be able to look forward to what comes next for Mars or even here on planet Earth. with that, I guess the question is, if we get to that section, who would like to present our key intersections? So we already have Robert and Stephanie have volunteered.
Nobody's giving a thumbs up to that because they know that
I don't know. I mean, I'm looking at Kelly, and Kelly's hand is like, is that her raising her hand like that? I'm not sure. I mean,
I see that going up in her avatar.
I see that in her avatar. I was like,
Kelly, are you volunteering? She's
no.
giving us a thumbs up. Wait, I'm going to turn my
down.
computer screen upside down so that her thumbs down becomes a thumbs up.
No, she says yes. Anyway, I'm going to call out. I'm going to call out on Bailey actually as our student representative to make sure that we have diversity on who is speaking here. I know we have educators and everything like that, and I know you're learning to be an educator, but you are also a student, which is a very important aspect. And I'd love to have you be the voice for our key intersections if you're willing to take my voluntolding.
Yeah, I think I can do that. Sure.
Wonderful. All right, so we got that. Final thing, with about 5 minutes to go before we have to bail and get back to the main room. Brent and I have had the wonderful experience of being involved in the Shaping EDU community now for a considerable period of time. And one of the real strengths is the conversations that start here unpredictably lead into other things. The broadband initiative that we've been doing for over 2 years came out of a conversation a bunch of us were having at one of these meetings, and we're still going strong with fostering universal broadband. The Are We There Yet group that I've been plugging all the way through with the background that I'm using here. This came out of last summer's conference where we were talking about storytelling as a way to share successes in pandemic era learning, and we're continuing to meet on an every other week basis and doing things. For this group, the first of two important questions is, do you want to continue this conversation either formally or informally? Yes or no? One thumbs up. I've seen some smiles like, I don't know, I don't want to commit to something like that. Seeing a couple thumbs up.
Need to see you again.
So about a fourth of the group is definitely putting the thumbs up on that. Great. Second thing then is to decide on a format. Now, models that are in place include what we've done with broadband and with Are We There Yet? You get one or two people that know that they want to stay with it for a while, and they become the co-facilitators, understanding that the responsibility is not all on them. It's a group dynamic, and part of it is you keep bringing in new people. You meet on an established schedule in whatever setting you want to do that works for all of you. We generally use Zoom for our meetings. We have standing meetings going, so anybody that wants to get added to the mailing list, we handle that through Shaping EDU, and people continue to meet. I was talking to Brent earlier today and saying that it felt to me like a lot of what we're going to be talking about today was story-based, and a potential place for us to meet is those of you who want to continue meeting as a group might join the storytelling group. Are We There Yet? For a couple of meetings, and see if what we're doing in gathering stories gives you a framework for gathering stories about pedagogy and about curriculum and about assessment. And if it becomes strong enough as a subtopic, then you might spin off. A benefit of that is you can see how we're already running meetings, learn from the practices we've established. And when you say, okay, I like this about that meeting, maybe not that so much, then you're ready to spin off on your own meetings and run it the way you want. But that way you don't just start from scratch, you don't start cold, trying to even structure with the organizational thing of how do we get together and who's going to facilitate. Our meetings are always meant to be an hour or less. They generally start with a reminder of what we are there for. There's always a statement of purpose. And then we decide very quickly one or two things we think we can accomplish. Anything that we can't, we push off for the next meeting or have people working between meetings. And we've got some shared documents that we're always adding to. There's not an expectation you're at every meeting. None of us can be at every meeting, but there is some consistency about the people facilitating the sessions. So with that framework, what appeals to you? Do you want to start your own group? Do you want to start in under something like Are We There Yet? To get a sense of how this might work? Or do you have another idea?
I have a thought.
Yes.
Why don't we see what happens from the report outs too? Like, is that a group, you know, like to Mars in all of these different facets, you know, like maybe if it doesn't, it could be an existing group. It could be a new group where we think holistically about that education on Mars and what are those advancements that need to take place and how do we then bring them back to Earth? Just a thought.
That is a really nice.
It's a good thought.
Anybody
I
else?
mean, I was just going to say, add to what you were saying, Paul, is one of the thoughts that we had this morning was that the "are we there yet" could easily even shift into becoming this group. We wanted, because that's what we're focusing on, like what were the best practices from the pandemic and what is like during the pandemic, what came out of it, what are the things that happened. Not pushing that that's the way to go, just as a final thought on that. And the other people in the group don't know that we're saying this.
Well, I should be talking to my co-conspirator.
Yeah, you should be asking Lisa.
Lisa Coster. So let me leave the open invitation here. After today's session, decide what appealed to you. Just decompress a little bit and see what actions might be possible for you as an individual within the framework of shaping EDU. And if you feel lost over the next week, not knowing where to go, come back to Brent and me as a starting point. I'm real easy to find. It's paul@paulsignorelli.com. And I'm all over this thing called the internet. So you shouldn't have any trouble reaching me. And Brent, give your contact pitch so that they know how to get to you.
Yeah, probably LinkedIn or bscholar@asu.edu. That works.
Emily's just made a great suggestion, adding our emails to the working document if we're interested to continue the conversation. Feel free to do that at the bottom of that. That's another great thing for Brent and me to go back to later.
No, at the top, where we have team members' name, the team members, that's where she's talking.
Thank you. Even better. Yes. Yeah, if you leave it up to me, I'll tell you to go to the page right after the last page and then we'll all be lost. Wrap up time. We got about 2 minutes before we should take a brief break and then get back to the main room. What was valuable to you about the almost 3 hours you just spent here? Anybody?
I'm going to go with the community. I love just meeting new people and hearing all of your amazing ideas. Thank you for all sharing.
I really enjoyed hearing people, getting to hear all the diverse contributions. At a certain point, I thought we were trying to overly simplify the conversation, and was worried about what we were going to actually report out. But suddenly at the end, we had this sort of flourishing of activity and really nice, well put together thinking that I think actually adequately represented the conversation that took place. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Noah. And a lot of that just comes from our other colleagues at Shaping EDU who put so much thought into how this conference could play out and getting the right tools on that we could play with. Anyone else? What was valuable to you here?
Yeah, so I'll just say that I'm always building stuff, which means I'm always talking to people about what they are doing, what they want to do, you know, how they're doing it. Like I interview people constantly. And this is an interesting group interview for me. This is kind of how I see it, is like this is a group interview consisting of subject matter experts in multiple fields. And I think that that is a really great environment that lends itself to a discourse that produces you know, things of value. So like ideas, some of the things we wrote in the document. And I think that, you know, Ruben was here earlier, but like the idea of metaphor, like using Mars as a metaphor for thinking about what we're doing now, what we could be doing, and how we bridge that gap, you know, in education. I think this conversation was representative of that goal. So that's a real achievement, considering that it's relatively serendipitous, you know, assuming who's in the room, like it attracts certain people, but it's just been really nice, especially, you know, chatting with folks, educators, you know, who are in classrooms right now, or, you know, will probably be wrapping up their classroom work and going to in-service training at some point. But yeah, it was really great. And thank you guys for facilitating this and inviting me.
Pleasure. My favorite question at the end of any learning op: what's something you'll do differently in the next week or two as a result of having been in this conversation? Anybody?
So I'm thinking of having my students collaborate and do a field guide and start that as a regular practice in my class. I'm just trying to figure out how to make it work, but I think it could be a really great way to engage.
Oh, bring that back to us. If that works, contact me or contact Brent. We'll do a quick interview with you and write that up for the Shaping EDU blog. That would be a lovely story. Thanks. Anybody else? Something you'll do differently as a result of today's conversation?
Make
I'm
sure
going to
everyone's
include
heard.
sorry, I was going to say, I'm going to include the word field guide. So this is a gap. So like I talk all day about micro-credentials and pathways and learning pathways and interoperable learner records and like all this stuff that's sort of at the forefront of a lot of the work that's happening in education and the labor market broadly. And field guides is new. I've never encountered the word field guides. So, and the fact that it resonated with so many different people, I'm going to continue to test that after this. So that's my next step. It's just introducing that term and seeing how it resonates with different folks as I do like product interviews and meet with clients and this sort of thing.
Fantastic. Brent, were you going to add something?
I was just going to say to make sure that we got a chance to hear from everybody. Not calling on you that you have to speak, but I know Melanie's here and I can't see your name because it's blocked and I don't want to say it wrong.
We got Shamina, Aaron, Kelly.
Shamina, thank you. Because Shamina's name was blocked because of the transcription. Aaron and Emily, Stephanie, Kelly, Bailey.
At least one more.
Thoughts?
What will you do differently?
Come on, Bailey. What are you going to take? Okay, I'm going to call him Bailey again because you're going to go back to class as a student.
Yeah,
what are you going to go and tell your peers about what happened today?
Yeah, I was just about to share anyways. So I think that I spend a lot of time, especially in like my own teacher prep program, you spend a lot of time thinking about the education system on earth, like in a very negative light. And it seems like you're just kind of stuck in this like system that just like generally sucks. Like, and so being able to have this experience where like you're able to actually imagine and put into practice, or not put into practice, but like think about it critically, like the different things that could happen in an education system if we were to design something completely new for a completely new planet. And think about like I look at these, like all of this list that we created on this document, and I don't necessarily feel like any of it is like non-feasible for Earth. I mean, so it's really encouraging, I think, to look at. So I think just the way it's kind of like a mindset shift for me, honestly, like the way that I think about the system that I'm like entering into as I'm about to graduate in a year from my degree and begin teaching and start student teaching here in the fall. So it's just refreshing. Yeah, a really refreshing.
That's awesome.
Bailey,
I think you nailed on the head. Why did they say, we said anything about why Mars, why not Earth, right? That was some of the big, that's why, because it frees your mind that little bit. So, you know, I think for me to try to take that away to how can I free my students' minds to open up to something larger than just this class. I mean, I always try to do that, but what other way can I do that?
Bailey, I would invite you, when you do the final of the 3 presentations back to the group, add on 2 or 3 lines of what you just said and make it personal, because that's where the whole story is. I'm looking at the back of my screen. Are we there yet? Not quite, but we're there in terms of having to get to the next group. So thank you, Noah. Thank you, Laura, Brent, Robert, Emily, Kelly, Bailey, Stephanie, Aaron, Shamina, Melanie, and all of you who are watching the archive version of this for being part of our conversation, and hope to see you all soon.